Production funding for Behind the Headlines is made possible in part by the WKNO Production Fund, the WKNO Endowment Fund, and by viewers like you. Thank you.
Storm cleanup, changes to police funding, and much more tonight on Behind the Headlines. I'm Eric Barnes, publisher of the Memphis Daily News. Thanks for joining us. I am joined tonight by a roundtable of journalists, starting with Maya Smith from the Memphis Flyer. Thanks for being here. Ryan Poe with the Memphis Commercial Appeal. Thanks for being here again.
Thanks for having me.
Brunell Smith, publisher, the New Tri-State Defender. Thanks for being here.
Glad to be back.
Along with Bill Dries, senior reporter with the Memphis Daily News. So I'll start with you, Bill, on the storm. We are taping this on Thursday, so we'll give updates as of Thursday. Where are we in terms of the number of homes and customers without power, the number of crews out there, and so on?
We started with 188,000 homes and businesses with no power on the Memorial Day weekend. That's about 45% of Memphis Light, Gas, and Water's customers across the city. We're now, as of this taping, at around 30,000. The way that Jerry Collins, the president of MLGW, has described this is that they've taken care of the large outage areas. Now they're on the smaller areas, which is kind of the same amount of effort, but a much smaller return. So this is the time when you may not have power, but you may look across your very narrow neighborhood street and see that your neighbor's porch light is on.
This is when people start to get kind of frustrated, if history is any example on this. But we were talking before the show a little bit about how, Brunell, this storm, unlike the last two big ones, you know, Hurricane Elvis and the ice storm back in the 90s, there's social media, and there's a kind of update and communication that didn't exist in the past events.
Yeah, I think that it really permeates all life nowadays, you know, that the level of communication and awareness of what's going on is much more immediate and substantial. So, you know, and I don't know whether it helps the situation or sort of exacerbates it or makes it worse, but ultimately, you know, I think there's a lot of criticism that's been sort of levied, but, you know, if you look at the situation, it seems to have been handled fairly well and within, you know, given the amount of damage, the amount of trees that were down, you know, assessing and then, you know, addressing has really moved in probably as swift a manner as it possibly could.
Yeah, your thoughts, Ryan Poe. I mean, just Kyle Veazey, the communications, one of the communications people for the mayor's office, former friend of the show and colleague of yours at the CA, he's been tweeting and Facebook posting and all that from his phone, correct?
Yeah, he told me he's wearing out the keyboard of his phone. After the storm, he was without power. A lot of the city employees were, and so what he did was he took to social media to communicate a lot of the updates that we would typically see coming through TV or whatever outlet. So yeah, it's a whole new ball game for the social media.
In terms of, and staying with the mayor's office, there are the whole funding issues. So they've already got, what, like $6 million from the council that was approved, and then potentially some federal disaster money that can reimburse the city?
Yes, the city council has yet to approve. They'll approve Tuesday, likely approve Tuesday, $6 million in local spending on disaster cleanup or on a storm cleanup. Now we could get some of that money back, 80% reimbursement of half of that money. From the federal government if we get over our threshold. So we have to have $9 million worth of damage in order to get federal aid.
Right. Is that $9 million in city or county property, or is that just $9 million in homeowners and everything?
It's $9 million in essence public infrastructure county-wide.
Right, right. And you would think just driving around that they were going to more than meet that threshold. You would think.
And MLG&W said they've got $7 million in damage already, and the city estimates close to $10 million in damage. So we're already at $17 million. Yeah. We should easily pass that, they think.
Your take on the reaction of the city and what you're hearing from people.
I think the city had a very good reaction, and just the fact that, like they said, they're keeping people updated on Facebook and Twitter, and really just keeping people informed. So people are, in a sense, not in the dark when they are in the dark. Right. So I think that's good. And then
Right, right. It is one of those things that people just get frustrated. If you don't have power, there were people, I was lucky, I never lost power. People in our office who did, they're just angry. They just walk around the office, they're shaking their heads, they don't feel, they're angry. And there's really nothing you can say to those people. But I don't think we see you see crews everywhere, you see them methodically going through a process to get everything hooked back up.
Yeah, and people say 40,000 customers still without power, but people need to remember there are a lot of people in those.
Right,
in that
it could be 5 people in that house, it could be 2 people in that house. Yeah,
so
exactly.
That's a lot of people without power.
We'll segue a little bit, we'll stay with the city, Bill. The budget, we had city council members on last week talking about the budget, and it's another kind of uneventful budget season, which is surprising given how much trouble there's been over the last 5 years or so. But there's further conversation about the funding of the police, of overtime, of the understaffing. Walk us through where we are with some of the ideas about funding the police department.
This is kind of the other shoe of what we talked about last week. There was $2.7 million in overtime that the Council Budget Committee cut. The administration agreed to it. That went toward a 1% across the board pay raise. So there was that discussion, but there was this much larger discussion about the majority, the biggest percentage of the city's operating budget goes to public safety, the police and fire department. And there are clearly some council members, a lot of council members, maybe not a majority, but certainly a good number of council members think that is skewed in the wrong direction, that there should be more money going toward community centers, things in neighborhoods, which they see as a more appropriate response to the city's crime problem. So Martavius Jones of the council has proposed cutting $7.3 million in police funding. This $7.3 million is the amount of money that he's calculated the police department spends to fund 161 positions in the police department that the department will likely not fill in the coming fiscal year.
Yeah, and it's tough for politicians. I mean, I think all 3 council members who were on last week, Berlin Boyd, Martavius, and Edmund Ford, all said they're in favor of increasing the number of police on the streets. Strickland wants to get back to 2,400 police officers. They said they're in favor of that. Their classes going through the academy. They just don't want to fund these empty positions. But it's not just the money, Burnell. It's also this approach to priorities. As Bill said, I mean, and Berlin Boyd, the chair of the council, said last week, almost 70% of the operating budget, 70% of what, $700 million operating budget goes to fire and police. It's a huge spend.
A huge portion, about 68, 70%. And, I think that, they make a good point in terms of, making sure that there are as much efficiencies there as possible. So if you, allocate these dollars, just $7.3 million that Councilman Jones is proposing, if you leave it in, then what happens? Does it ultimately get used relative to overtime pay and other things? Or, if you pull those out, because those jobs probably will not be filled, at least 100 of them will certainly not be filled. Pull that money out and reallocate it to things that really impact quality of life in the community and impact residents in a more positive way, other than encounters with law enforcement. I think it's a smart approach to governance.
Right. Thoughts, Maya, on the city council right now and their priorities, either with the budgeting or with policing?
I agree with Burnell that I think it's a good idea to put money in things like community centers and things that build the community up, because that might prevent crime from happening, to begin with, and then you would need, less police on the street.
Right. And this is against a backdrop of a week ago, give or take, that Jeff Sessions, the U.S. Attorney General, was in town, and he is a controversial figure. I mean, some people very supportive. He has proposed nationally going back to the tougher sentencing, putting more people, kind of more of a lock people up, put them in jail kind of strategy that the Obama administration had moved away from in some ways. I don't know your thoughts. There's pressure on whether Strickland, some folks didn't want Strickland to even meet with him. Other folks said, well, even if he doesn't agree with him, he needs to meet with him because Jeff Sessions controls the purse strings. Your thoughts on that pressure and that political dynamic? Right?
Yeah, there was a lot of pressure. 100 people gathered outside City Hall to protest the meeting with Jeff Sessions. But yeah, talking to those people, they were shouting, no justice, no peace. And there's a lot of that kind of feeling, I think, that people want to see justice on a local level. They want, like Maya was talking about, to see those community centers and that actual investment that you can feel, as opposed to cracking down on crime, which they think generally hurts the community overall. So
right, I think David Waters in your paper had a column that captured some of that sentiment that invest in community centers, invest in education, and invest in other things, Bill, and that those should be our priorities. And yet at the same time, we've had this huge spike in violent crime. Mayor Strickland ran on a bringing down the crime rate platform. So he's in a place where I think he said, his general philosophy was he wanted to lock up more violent offenders but fewer nonviolent offenders. Because some of this gets into why people, when we've talked about on the show numerous times, people who have a taillight out, people who have fines, who end up in jail and then enter the criminal justice system for really minor offenses.
Yeah, the issue here is at a critical mass at this point. We've certainly had many years of the lock 'em up philosophy, up the sentences, don't let violent offenders out. And during the Obama administration, we also had a number of years, not the president's 2 full terms, but certainly most of the 8 years he was in office was spent examining that and pulling back on some of those priorities, saying, well, if locking people up had worked, why hasn't it worked after all of this?
Yeah, Brunel, your thoughts on this, on the Jeff Sessions visit and the whole debate?
I think the real issue is that I think we've sort of lost a view of the federal review of MPD. That the mayor and the police director Rollins went and asked the Department of Justice for this review, and we're supposed to go this comprehensive sort of 2-year process of really analyzing how Memphis Police Department was engaging with the community, so forth, so on, ways to improve. And my fear is now that you got Sessions there, those kinds of things, sort of fall to the wayside and either not happen or not happen on the level that was necessary. And on the heels of Darius Stewart and other things, I think it's very important that remains a priority and that it ultimately happens.
Certainly, Sessions is no fan and has let it be known that he will actively oppose the Civil Rights Division investigations of police departments, as in Chicago and Baltimore, which resulted in some really aggressive settlements and decrees. But I thought it was very interesting that Strickland, in his statement about his meeting with Sessions, said that he specifically called on Sessions to support the COPS review, which is the collaborative review of the police department that the city is cooperating in. And while Sessions has not targeted the COPS reviews like the one that's underway here, he certainly indicated that he is not a fan of that.
Right, and it is interesting too. I mean, it's one of the first times I saw the local impact of the election. It really struck me that here's Jeff Sessions, here are these sentencing guidelines in a city that has a lot of violence. I mean, and most major cities do, but Memphis is way up there. And if you watch things about Trump, whatever he's in Europe, you don't necessarily feel the impact on a local level, but suddenly Jeff Sessions is here talking about really major changes to how people could be sentenced and so on. So we'll move on from there to stay with the city budget for a second, a proposal, I'll go to you, Ryan, to look at an expansion of the Liberty Bowl. We're back to conversations about changes to the Liberty Bowl.
Right, well, and really they, Councilman Frank Colvett, made a motion and ultimately got into the budget $100,000 to study the Coliseum and decide whether they want to
The Liberty Bowl.
The Liberty Bowl. Sorry, and look at the possibility of music venues. And I think Bill actually probably knows more about that.
Well, it goes back to what I think you wrote, that the last big arena show, stadium show, was in '97 when U2 was here.
It was 20 years ago, and it was U2
right.
on their Pop Mart tour, and we haven't seen a stadium show. The first rock concert at the Liberty Bowl was in 1972. It was Three Dog Night, for those of you who might have the tickets down there. And the 70s into the early 80s was really the high point for that. Frank Colvett's point on this is that the tours got bigger, but the Liberty Bowl hasn't. So that's why these gigantic tours are passing us by. And without them, you have basically 9 dates a year at the Liberty Bowl, 7 Tiger football home games, the Southern Heritage Classic, and the AutoZone Liberty Bowl there. So he wants $100,000 to look at expanding it. The Liberty Bowl now is about 60,000 seats, which it was expanded in the 1980s just before our last bid for an NFL team.
Right, and it's seats, but it's also the ability to get the trucks in and out. Is that correct?
Right. Yeah, get more of the tractor trailer rigs in because the stages are bigger, everything is bigger.
I'm just still shocked that Three Dog Night was at the Liberty Bowl and it had 40 or 50,000 people went and saw Three Dog Night. I'm still I'm a little stunned by that. So more seriously, we'll move on to the last of the big public housing projects. Foot Homes all the residents have been moved out. This is the area to the southeast of the FedEx Forum, Vance Avenue, and all kind of around that area. It's a massive project. The 10th or 11th of the big housing projects. People have seen some of the other ones probably that have been converted. Your thoughts on this, Bruno?
Yeah, well, we've had this history that really kind of started under the leadership of Robert Lipscomb and sort of this vision of realigning or changing the face of public housing, and it certainly happened. This is the last of those, if you will, and it's going to mean a significant change. It's already meant significant change for the residents of that community and those that, generations of families that grew up there, that attended Booker T. Washington and other institutions around that area. But ultimately, I think it'll be positive for the community. I think what has to, again, with those kind of projects, you have to make sure that it's not a pure gentrification thing where those residents don't really get a chance to come back, that they're scattered across Memphis without the connections and resources that they were used to. But ultimately, I think it's going to be a radical change that really expands downtown into that southeast corridor, if you will, and means significant additional growth, for the greater Memphis area and of course, for downtown.
This was a plan, I'll go to you, Ryan, that was started in the Wharton administration, Lipscomb, as we just talked about. It was one of the surprises that Strickland found when he took office, that the city had a whole lot of federal money had been approved for this through the help of Steve Cohen and others, but the city had to come up with $30 million. Are they doing that over a number of years? How is that working? They came up with the money, obviously.
Yes, and it is over a number of years. It is to the capital improvement budget, so it'll be borrowing. But in return, we'll get a $209 million project right in downtown that'll really kind of bring up the whole area, they think. So yeah, it's going to be there's going to be lifestyle centers in there and all kinds of things to help people. It's not going to be your traditional housing project. Right.
And I don't know how much you've covered this, Maya, but they're looking at a grocery store that they want to get in there. They're looking at, as Brunel talked about, in some of these other moves with the public housing, it's disruptive no matter what. I don't think there's a way in which it isn't, because you're moving people out of their homes. But they're trying to offer more support services, and they're trying to view this more holistically. It's not just homes, it's a whole neighborhood. How much have you been covering it?
I haven't covered it much, but I will say that I think it's important when you kind of uproot people that you uproot them and you give them support in return. When you go into a neighborhood, you have to make sure that you're leaving the neighborhood better, than it started out. So I do think that, the holistic approach is better than just focusing on housing.
Yeah. Bill, thoughts on that?
That's actually been the evolution of this. This all started in 1998 with the demolition of Lemoyne Gardens, which went from being, like most of the projects, a place of great promise to being probably one of the most feared housing projects in the southeastern United States by the time it was demolished. There were people on waiting lists who didn't want to go to Lemoyne Gardens when their name came up, so they just got put on the back of the list on that. So we've evolved from ending public housing as we know it, which was something that Willie Harrington and Robert Lipscomb both said numerous times at the outset, to thinking more about what happens to the people who are there. Are they simply moved to another part of the city? And the city's been pretty pretty open about the fact that the Foote Homes residents have had difficulty transitioning or finding other housing as the project has been emptied out.
Yeah, where was Lemoyne? And where is
Lemoyne Gardens was in South Memphis, across from Lemoyne Owen College by Elmwood Cemetery. And that was how this all started, and it went to the point where now Foote Homes is the last standing. Might also add that we've also seen Foote and Claiborne Homes are on opposite sides of Lauderdale Street. That's the boundary between those two large housing projects. And it used to be that if you didn't know the area, you couldn't tell when you were in one and when you were in the other. Well, Claiborne underwent this transformation. So now when you drive down Lauderdale, you see a before and after image on each side of the road.
It's very striking.
And now Foote is going to again mirror Claiborne, but in a very different way.
And I should say too, I mean, there's the aesthetic difference, which is huge. I mean, who doesn't want to live in a lovely home or a lovely apartment or a lovely, but there's also that the idea is to bring in mixed income, so that the replacement neighborhoods are not purely people who are on public assistance. They're not purely people who are living in public housing. It's a mix of ownership and renting, and that's more how traditionally we lived public housing across the country, boxed in a whole lot of people, generally African American people, into real centers of poverty. And so this unwinding this difficult quandary has not been simple.
Yeah, I agree that public housing, as it was originally envisioned, was a failed experiment. It locked people into poverty for generations and generations, and definitely needed to be dismantled, much in the way we've done it here in Memphis. I think that there's something left to be desired about how we've really dealt with the lives of those individuals who are impacted by that dismantling and providing the kind of resources. But, I think this is a chance for Memphis to really get it right and to demonstrate that, there is some sensitivity around that.
Right. We have just 4 minutes left. And Bill, you wrote this week the Shelby County School System presented a budget to the County Commission, and it's very uneventful. There's not a lot of yelling and screaming. There's not a lot of controversy about it, which is sort of shocking after all these years of controversies with the budget, with consolidation, deconsolidation, the shrinking of the number of schools and students that Shelby County Schools has. Why is this one so uneventful?
Because of what's happened in the last 5 or 6 budget seasons, where you have a superintendent in Dorsey Hobson who has had a specific philosophy about how to approach the Shelby County Commission, the only local funder of Shelby County schools. He's moved away from the tact of confrontation and give us this money and you have no line item control, to a more conciliatory approach. And while it's been smooth, some school board members are now questioning whether the school system shouldn't be more confrontational to some degree with the county commission. And Hobson says, we still don't have the funding that I think we need, but the state has to step up. Right. And we have a lawsuit and we're in court with the state now, and we're about to take depositions on that.
He was careful. I mean, if you're a superintendent, there's always a political element. He was appreciative that there was increasing in the BEP funding formula in the Haslam budget, but again, he would say not near enough, and some of these other school systems would say not near enough.
The phrase he used was the state is still not pulling its weight.
Right. Your thoughts on this sort of non-controversial budget from the Shelby County school system?
Well, I mean, I think it reflective of some really smart, in some ways painful approaches and strategies that the school board and Superintendent Hobson have applied. They've really now reversed the trend. Rather than closing schools, they're investing in particularly some of the inner city schools and making some real smart decisions that will positively impact students and families in those neighborhoods. So I think it's the corrective action that has really, we see now has been effective, and now it's the time to not retrench, but to say, hey, we need to make the investments. And I believe that because of those approaches, the commission is a lot more willing to say, hey, let's step it up and help make these things happen.
One of those things that I think it seemed, and maybe you may have mentioned this in your article, Bill, that has built goodwill from Dorsey Hobson, the current school board, with the county commission, is they close schools. That was always a a point of contention. You've got schools that are third empty. You've got schools that are half empty. We need to close them down. Dorsey Hobson sat on the show and every time says it doesn't save us a lot of money to close a school, but it can be academically better. But it gets almost back to the housing project issues of closing a failing school. Well, that's still someone's school. That's still someone's neighborhood school. So those tough decisions did build goodwill with the county commission.
I mean, I think it built goodwill, and ultimately, just a reallocation of where those students were going, and working with the neighborhood and people in the community to help understand those moves. I think it built goodwill. Ultimately, I mean, initially it was terrible for people in certain neighborhoods, but I think overall, he's been able to manage all of that and make it work.
Right, and Bill, I'll put you on the spot. Are there more, in this budget, are there more iZone schools? The iZone being the kind of focused schools that have been very successful in terms of turning schools around? There are more.
Yeah, you'll not only see some more iZone schools, you will also see the school system in this next school year try to go beyond iZones and expand those programs into schools without necessarily the Innovation Zone designation.
And no more ASD schools. I mean, not they're static in terms of the number of schools they have.
Static so far. The ASD is undergoing some real changes of its own.
All right. That's all the time we have. Join us again next week. We'll have Mayor Mark Luttrell, a number of county commissioners on. Thank you all for being here. Thank you for joining us. Good night.